Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that jobs no longer exist. No offices, no bosses, no schedules, no emails. No alarm clock screaming at you at 6 a.m. Sounds amazing, right? But here's the weird part. For over 99% of human history, this wasn't a fantasy. It was reality. Ancient humans lived for tens of thousands of years without jobs, careers, salaries, or even the concept of a work week. Yet somehow they survived. They raised families, they built communities, they found food, and in many ways, their daily lives looked nothing like what most of us imagine. So, what exactly did humans do all day before jobs existed? The answer might completely change how you think about work itself. When most people imagine prehistoric life, they picture non stop struggle. A caveman wakes up, runs after animals, fights predators, barely survives, falls asleep exhausted, then repeats the same thing the next day. But anthropologists discovered something surprising. Many hunter gatherer societies actually spent far less time working than modern people. Studies of traditional hunter gatherer groups suggest that obtaining food often required only a few hours per day, not 12, not 10, sometimes just 3 to 5 hours. In fact, anthropologist Marshall Chalins famously described these societies as the original affluent society because they were the first to prove that you don't need a lot of stuff to be rich. You just need a lot of time. That doesn't mean life was easy. Food wasn't guaranteed. Danger was real, but the idea that ancient humans worked endlessly simply isn't true. In fact, many researchers have called them affluent not because they were rich, but because they often had more free time than we do, which raises a strange question. If they weren't working all day, what were they doing? Let's imagine a typical day 20,000 years ago. You wake up with the sunrise, no alarm clock, no commute, no rush. The first thing you notice is your tribe. Humans evolved in small groups, usually around 30 to 100 people, and almost everything was done together. Imagine this sensory experience of that morning. The smell of wood smoke from the previous night's fire, the sound of the tribe waking up not to the digital ping of notifications, but to the calls of birds and the soft rustle of leaves. Your morning routine wasn't about checking emails, it was about checking the environment. You were scanning the horizon, listening to the wind, and understanding the subtle changes in the weather that would dictate the day's success. It was a state of deep presence that most of us have completely lost in the modern world. Some people begin preparing tools, others gather information about nearby animals. A hunting group may form, not because it's somebody's job, but because the group needs food. There is no manager assigning tasks, no weekly schedule. People contribute based on skill, age, experience, and necessity. A skilled hunter joins the hunt. Someone knowledgeable about plants gathers edible foods. Others stay behind with children. The goal isn't productivity, the goal is survival, and that changes everything. Movies often make hunting look like an all day action sequence. In reality, hunting was unpredictable. Some days were successful, some were not. A hunting trip could end quickly or it could fail completely. What's fascinating is that meat was not always the main source of calories. Many ancient humans got a large portion of their food from gathered plants, fruits, roots, nuts, and seeds. In other words, the image of men constantly chasing mammoths is not entirely accurate. A lot of survival involved knowledge, knowing which plants were safe, which areas had food, which seasons produced the best resources. The most valuable tool wasn't always a spear. Think about the sheer intelligence required to survive. You needed to be a botanist, a meteorologist, and a tracker all at once. You knew exactly which berries were poisonous, which roots were edible. You knew the migratory patterns of animals as well as a modern navigator knows a GPS map. When you didn't have a supermarket, your brain was your pharmacy, your library, and your survival guide. This wasn't primitive living. It was a highly complex intellectual lifestyle that required constant learning. It was information. And unlike today, that information wasn't stored on a phone. It was stored inside people's heads, passed down throughout generations. Now comes the part that shocks most people. When basic needs were met, ancient humans often had downtime, a lot of it. They talked, they told stories, they played games, they sang, they danced, they created art. Some of the oldest cave paintings on earth are over 30,000 years old. Think about that. Even when survival was difficult, humans still made time for creativity. Because humans aren't machines, we are storytellers. Long before Netflix, TikTok, or YouTube, stories were entertainment. Stories taught lessons, stories preserved history, stories helped tribes survive. In many ways, storytelling was the internet of the prehistoric world. But this free time wasn't just for entertainment. It was the glue that kept the tribe alive. When ancient humans sat around a fire, they were sharing crucial survival data. They were discussing animal migrations, the changing weather patterns, and passing down botanical knowledge to the younger generation. It was a completely different kind of economy, an economy of trust and shared information, rather than money and labor. If someone was sick or injured, they didn't lose their job or the ability to eat. The community simply absorbed the burden. This extended downtime allowed early humans to develop complex languages, deep social bonds, and the very culture that makes us human today. Without this massive amount of free time, the rapid cognitive evolution of our species simply wouldn't have been possible. Children in hunter gatherer societies weren't sitting in classrooms for 8 hours a day. They learned by watching, by exploring, by participating. A child might spend the day observing hunters, learning which plants were edible, practicing skills through play. Education wasn't separated from life, life itself was the classroom. And those lessons were often more immediately useful than anything written in a textbook. The skills learned as a child could literally determine whether you survived adulthood. If life worked this way for thousands of years, what changed? The answer was agriculture. Around 12,000 years ago, humans began farming. For the first time, people could produce large food surpluses. Villages grew, then towns, then cities. As societies became larger, specialization appeared. Some people farmed, others built tools, others traded goods. Eventually, roles became occupations. Occupations became careers, and careers became jobs. The modern workday was born, not overnight, but through thousands of years of gradual change. The next time your alarm clock goes off, remember this: for most of human history, nobody woke up wondering what their job title was. There were no resumes, no performance reviews, no Monday mornings. Instead, people spend their days helping their community survive, finding food, raising children, and living in a world that revolved around nature rather than schedules. That doesn't mean their lives were better or worse, just different. But understanding how ancient humans spend their days helps answer a fascinating question. Did humans create work, or did work create the world we live in today?